So here's something really cool you can play against the Ruy Lopez as black. After e4, e5, knight f3, knight to c6, bishop to b5, we get the starting position of the Ruy Lopez. And I've discovered that there's actually a really cool gambit that you can play against this opening that nobody has ever played before. And it starts with a little bit of a sideline, not too weird just yet, but the fianchetto defense, pawn to g6. This is something that's a little bit off the beaten track, but it definitely has been played by some pretty strong names. You'll see the Magnus Carlsen has done this quite a few times. This is so far pretty normal theory. And from here, white usually will decide on one of three different moves, either c3 with the idea of playing d4, d4 immediately, or castling and then later playing c3 and d4. That's generally white's main plan in the center. And for the most part, against, let's say, the most common move, pawn to c3, black will generally do something where you either play a6, this is the standard Ruy Lopez move, maybe you stabilize the center, maybe you develop one of your kingside pieces. Well, here is where you can actually do something completely off the books. You can play the move pawn to f5. And this is the Kevitz Gambit. Now, this is a really cool opening. It's something that definitely not a lot of people are even going to know about, so you're going to surprise quite a few folks. And fortunately for us, if you do flip over to the Lichess database, you will discover that there are 25 games, which really is a very tiny sample size. There's a lot of openings that are, really unknown that have a lot more games in it than that. So we're going to get the most we can out of this opening, but this is it. This is the Kevitz Gambit. Now, pawn to f5 may look a little bit strange because, again, you really think as black, maybe you want to develop some of your pieces, maybe you want to do a little bit more in the center before you play f5. But positionally, f5 is the pawn break that you typically do want to play, and sometimes against the Ruy Lopez, people do play f5 on move 3, so maybe it's not that bad. Or maybe it is. We'll go through it and we'll let you decide. Now, immediately after this move, we do have a major threat, which is just simply to take the e-pawn. And what I would expect most players to do when facing this for the first time is to take our pawn right back. And now we want to be careful and make sure that we understand what we're doing with the black pieces. We should definitely be careful not to regain the pawn. This is a gambit. We are sacrificing that pawn, and we are never going to take with our g-pawn. If we ever take back this pawn, we're doing it with the bishop. We don't want to get in any situation where white might possibly be able to chomp, queen to h5. Something like this, getting the queen to this diagonal, would be absolutely lethal for us. We need to avoid weakening this diagonal if possible. So our main idea here is actually to play pawn to e4, and our dream situation is to get to some position where this pawn on e4 is a tremendous strength, and it's constricting all of these pieces by preventing white from playing either d3 or d4. This is a break that white needs to get in fairly quickly, or else if we're able to get a bind, let's say on the d3 square, white can end up in a lot of trouble, and that is something that we're definitely playing for, and we'll go through and see how that could possibly happen. Now, there's only 8 games here. There's really not a lot to even talk about, but this is what I would imagine a player sitting in the white pieces would be thinking right now. They would probably be thinking to themselves, hey, I know what's going on. You're attacking my knight. I would love to go to d4. This would seem to be the most natural square that I could possibly put my piece on. But if I play knight to d4 right away, black will take. I will get doubled d-pawns. This, in fact, though, is the best way for white to continue. However, I imagine if you're facing this with the white pieces for the first time and you don't know that, this could be a dangerous surprise. This might be something you don't want to allow, but we'll show you in just a minute why this is possibly the best way for white to continue. Possibly, if you wanted to refute this gambit, this is the way that you would want to approach it. So we'll take a look at that. But first, I want to show a game that I played because I figured that I would prep this opening, play a game, make a YouTube video. That's the formula, and that's exactly what I did. And when I was preparing for this, here's what I thought white would be thinking. I thought they might think to themselves, okay, I want to play knight to d4, but I don't want doubled pawns. I imagined a clever opponent might decide, I know just what to do. I will play bishop takes c6, and now, after you recapture, I will play knight to d4. And I assumed white would be very happy with this decision, but it turns out this is actually a bit of a trap that we are hoping to set for the opponents. Because actually, surprisingly enough, this is suddenly already a very dangerous opponent, position for white, potentially even losing. Because now we are going to play c5, and you are going to understand that wherever this knight goes, I figured, okay, most opponents might play knight to b3. We can, in this position, instead of taking back, which has been played in this one game between two 2800s, and this is in fact probably a very good move for black, I figured I would get this position against somebody and I would play queen to d3. And if you put this on an engine, you will see immediately that this is like basically winning for black. The problem for white is pretty obvious. Well, you can't castle, that's one issue, but how in the world are you going to develop your queen side? It's nearly impossible. And you can imagine a variation like queen e2, that seems like a sensible way, hoping that maybe we trade with them and, you know, get them out of sort of the bind. But here I would have played something like pawn to a5, threatening to trap the knight. And you can see the computer line just goes a4, preventing us from playing a4 ourselves. But if we get this position and we got this amazing bind on d3, and I get the pawn back, like this is just going to be super stunningly winning for black. So this is what I'm hoping for. I play some opponent and maybe we get to this position. It's also worth pointing out that after this line with bishop takes on c6, if the knight hops into d4 and we play here, the computer recommends the slightly better knight to e6 as the appropriate way for the knight to hop out of there, but this is essentially the same. We're going to snap this guy off, we're going to play queen to d3, we're going to get castled on the queen side, we're going to go this way, our pieces can easily develop, and white has the same problem. How are you going to develop the queen side? It really is not obvious how these pieces are getting into the game, so again, we would have a fantastic advantage. So I was excited, you know, I thought maybe if I ever get this in a game, maybe I can get this prep and maybe I'll win. But I got a little bit of a surprise. This is my game that I played a couple days ago, and I was playing with the black pieces, and I decided to play the Kevitz Gambit. Here it is, in action for the first time. And after this recapture, which was to be expected, I played pawn to e4. And then I was hoping my opponent would take my knight, because I knew that this is not a particularly good move. But I knew it's very logical, so a lot of players might end up going for it. So I took back, he played here, I played pawn to c5, and I'm getting excited. Move your knight anywhere, and I'm going to put my queen on d3, and then I'm going to win the game. I was like, you know, I'm getting ready. I'm already feeling good about myself. But my opponent in this game decided not to even move the knight. He plays for this wild, complicated variation where he's sacrificing an entire piece. He plays f takes g6. Now, I'm going to hide the notation, but I could understand right away exactly what the opponent was playing for. And it obviously has to do with tricks on this diagonal. So I took his knight. I knew he was going to play queen to h5, and intuitively, it's one of those situations where I felt like this was really good for me, and in fact it is. This is already winning for black, but during the game, I got a little confused, because after knight to f6, g7, this was all expected, I took his queen, he took my rook and made a queen, and suddenly we're in this position where I'm like, I feel like I've done this right, but I'm staring over here, it says +3, and I'm getting a little worried. I'm like, oh no, have I messed this up? And I kind of freaked out, I panicked, I played bishop to f5, and then instantly resigned after queen to e5, because now I'm just losing more material. Then I went back, I put this on the computer at the end of the game, and I was shocked to discover that I'm super crazy winning in this position. So you can go ahead and pause if you want to solve this for black. I've done everything right so far. It's just right here, I need to come up with a pretty amazing idea. And the only other hint I can give you is that in a lot of positions similar to this, where one side is having the entire queen side cramped and it's very difficult to bring those pieces in, what that often means is that also the king is a weaker target because there's just not as many pieces that white can bring over to defend the king. So in fact, if you ask your computer what the heck is going on in this position, it will say queen g5 and watch the evaluation grow and grow and grow. So I want to play queen g5. I want to go after that pawn. And the main idea, though, is actually if, let's just say like g3, defending the pawn, the idea is knight to f6. And all of a sudden, the queen on h8 is trapped in. And it gets even more remarkable than that, because if we can just give white a few more moves, what you can understand is that not only might I one day castle and then just be able to trap this queen by moving all of the bishops out of the way, I also might be able to get an attack on the king. For example, let's just play some not particularly good moves for white, just to demonstrate. Some position where I'm able to bring my queen into the light squares, followed by bringing the bishop in, could also be incredibly lethal for white. So white's got to watch out for checkmating threats, and white's just got to worry that the queen is going to get trapped. Also, you still got to defend your entire queen side, so how are you going to do that? All of that needs to happen, and so in this position, I actually did all this right and could have been completely winning. So, bummer, I could have done a lot better. But what if we come back to our starting position? What if white actually plays this correctly? Is there a way to refute the Kevitz Gambit? Well, if there is, it would appear to be in this position after we play pawn to e4. What you should be considering with white is not giving away the light squared bishop. Okay, we've seen already this is a tremendous mistake because the d3 square is super critical to white's success. White needs to be able to break out of this bind with either d3 or d4, otherwise these pieces are never going to get into the game. So here's what should happen. After we play pawn to e4, the knight should hop straight into d4 right away, allowing us to inflict doubled pawns. Now, this is actually kind of interesting. The computer here does give a small advantage to white, and this is kind of like the main way that white should be playing, and it's suggesting the move knight to f6, which, okay, that seems kind of logical as well, but I would think if you've never seen this before, the way you would probably decide to play this as black is to take, and after the recapture, play c6, hoping to play d5 next, building a giant center. And this has actually occurred in 2 separate games. This is all we have to go on. Bishop to c4 is not very good because we're going to be playing d5. So white should go back to e2. And now after d5, we can see that it does at least at first appear that we do have a giant center. And the good news is, even if white decides to win a pawn, which perhaps they should go for, what we're hoping for is to at least get some sort of counterplay on the king side. And even though we've lost a pawn, we've gained access to a half-open file. And there is one game, it was played between two 2200s, and it wasn't a perfect game, but I think it is an excellent illustration as to what might happen if white does play as close to a good as you possibly can. So the reason that this is a good way for white to continue against this gambit is you get the move d3 in. This was the problem in the other line for white, so here our opponents here have solved that issue. Now after bishop to f5, the game went knight to c3, and what we saw was a position in which both sides decided to get castled. Okay, black defends this pawn, prevents the bishop from coming into f4, and you got a position where both sides castled on opposite wings. Now, what you can hope for is black. Like, the computer is going to say white is a pawn up, and then the computer will easily defend, but if you're playing this with black in a practical game, you can at least hope that maybe there's some sort of counterplay. Maybe you're going to be able to get an attack against the white king. And at least for now, you're definitely much safer as the black king over here on the queen side. So this game continued rook to b1, and I actually don't want to spoil everything that comes up. So white is going to go through with this sort of plan of trying to checkmate the black king. After bishop to d6, white had to defend the h-pawn, which came under attack. And then we saw black setting up some really nice tactics. First, he goes right after the d-pawn. White decides to stop it, but okay, also creating a couple weaknesses. And most of these moves were generally fine. But then black sets up an absolutely incredible tactic to win this game. After b5, c5 was played, not allowing black to open the b file. And this way, if you do open the c file, at least we get this very strong bishop on c5, cutting off this diagonal. Now, it was here, after queen d6, potentially setting up a lot of fun stuff, rook to e1. Here, black made an absolutely incredible play, and he's trying to look for something. How can he break through? How can he get an attack against the white king? Well, he started by taking this knight, removing one of the defenders of this f-pawn. And after the queen took back, he took this pawn, sacrificing another piece so that if you do take this, our queen is coming straight into the action, followed by our knight hopping into g3. So white said, I know what to do. I'm going to check. I'll throw this check in too. Sure, why not? And then eventually, when white took here, threatening the black queen, black actually played the incredible rook to f1. So it's a queen sacrifice, giving up the queen this way. This is where white actually resigned the game because it's mate in 2. After here, checkmate. And that could have been an incredible win for the Kevitz Gambit. So would you play this? I don't know. You'll let me know in the comments below, and make sure you're subscribed while you're down there. Bye!
If you're feeling trapped like a queen, No blunders, only sacrifice and see. Well, you may have the blues. Never be a chicken when you lose.